He was the quiet prince, the one nobody expected, the one who could not speak without pain. His name was George VI, and when his country needed a voice, it was his voice that saved it. Not because he was ready, but because he chose to try anyway. It was a cold morning in London, 1895. The British Empire was the most powerful in the world. It stretched across every ocean. It touched every continent. The sun never set on its lands. Into this world, on December 14th, 1895, a boy was born. His name was Albert Frederick Arthur George. He was the second son of the Duke of York, the man who would later become King George V. Albert was not the first son. He was not the heir. He was not the one people watched. That was his older brother, Edward. Charming, confident, beloved Edward. Albert was the other one. From a very young age, Albert had a stammer. When he tried to speak, the words would not come. They would stop. They would catch in his throat like something broken. He would open his mouth, and silence would come out instead of words. For a normal boy, this is painful. For a prince, it is a kind of prison. Albert also had weak knees. He was forced to wear painful metal splints to correct them. He was left-handed in a time when that was considered wrong. He was made to write with his right hand. He was being shaped into something he was not. And he was very, very alone. But there was something inside Albert that nobody could take away. He was kind, deeply, quietly kind. He noticed people. Not just kings and lords and powerful men. He noticed ordinary people, workers, soldiers, families trying to survive. He saw their lives. He cared about their struggles. And slowly, very slowly, he found something else too. Courage. Not the loud kind. Albert's courage was quieter than that. It was the courage of a man who knows he might fail and tries anyway. He also discovered a love for flying. As a young man, Albert trained with the Royal Naval Air Service. He learned to fly an aircraft. He became one of the first members of the royal family to qualify as a pilot. In the sky, there was no stammer. There were no crowds. There was just Albert and the wind and the feeling of being free. He also served during the First World War. He was present at the Battle of Jutland in 1916, one of the largest naval battles in history. He was sick during the battle. He was in real pain. But he stayed at his post. He did not run. That was Albert. Quiet, struggling, but always, always staying. It was a bright afternoon in London, 1936, and everything was about to change. Albert's older brother Edward was now King Edward VIII. He was everything Albert was not. Tall, charming, confident. The crowds loved him. The newspapers loved him. The whole world seemed to love Edward. But Edward had a secret. He was in love with a woman named Wallis Simpson. She was American. She was divorced twice. In 1930s Britain, this was deeply shocking. The Church of England did not accept divorce. The government did not approve. The empire did not accept it. A king could not marry this woman. It was impossible. But Edward did not care about impossible. He cared about Wallis. The British government gave Edward a choice. Give up Wallis Simpson, or give up the crown. Edward chose Wallis. On December 11th, 1936, King Edward VIII abdicated. He gave up the throne. He walked away from the most powerful position in the world for love. And just like that, the crown fell. It did not fall to a man who wanted it. It did not fall to a man who was ready. It did not fall to a man who felt prepared. It fell to Albert, the quiet prince, the one with the stammer, the one nobody had prepared for this moment. The weight of an empire landed on his shoulders. Albert did not want to be king. When he learned that Edward would abdicate, that the crown would come to him, Albert broke down. He went to his mother, Queen Mary. He held her hands, and he wept. He wept like a child. He was not crying from weakness. He was crying because he understood the weight of what was coming. He had spent his whole life fighting it. He had tried different therapists, different techniques, different treatments. Some helped a little, most helped nothing. The stammer was still there waiting for him every time he opened his mouth in public. How could a king lead a nation if he could not speak? How could he inspire people who needed strength when he felt none? It was a quiet afternoon in London, 1926. Years before the crown fell on his shoulders, Albert made one decision that would change everything. He found a man named Lionel Logue. Lionel Logue was not a royal doctor. He was not a famous professor. He was an Australian speech therapist who worked from a small, ordinary office in London. Their first meeting was unusual. Logue did not bow deeply and speak carefully the way people spoke to royalty. He treated Albert like a man, like a patient, like a human being who needed help, not a prince who needed to be impressed. Albert sat down in that small room. He was nervous. He was skeptical. He had tried so many times before. Logue asked him to read aloud. Albert began. The words caught. The stammer came. The silence followed. Logue leaned forward. He was calm. He was patient. He did not look away. Again, he said gently. Albert, read again. And then something small happened. Something that nobody watching from outside would notice. But Albert noticed. For one brief moment, the words came out. Clean, clear, without stopping. Just for a moment. But that moment was enough. Albert looked up. Something shifted in his eyes. They worked together for years. Logue taught Albert breathing techniques. He taught him to feel the words before he spoke them. He taught him to slow down, to trust his own voice. But more than techniques, Logue gave Albert something no royal doctor ever had. He gave him a friend, a real one. For a man who had spent his life feeling wrong and broken and alone, that friendship was everything. Albert became King George VI on December 12, 1936. He did not choose this. He did not want this, but he accepted it. Quietly, seriously, with the same steady courage he had shown his whole life. He chose the name George, not Albert. It was a deliberate choice. He wanted to honor his father. He wanted to signal stability. And slowly the people began to see him, not a charming king, not a spectacular king, but a real one, a human one, a king who showed up every single day and did the work even when the work was painful. The British people watched this man. They saw his effort. They saw his honesty. They did not see a perfect king. They saw something better. They saw a man who refused to give up, and they loved him for it. It was a grey morning in London, September 1939. Adolf Hitler's army had invaded Poland. The world had changed overnight. Britain and France declared war on Germany. The Second World War had begun, and King George VI had to speak to his nation. Not a small speech, not a ceremony. A live radio broadcast, heard by millions of people across Britain and across the empire. Families sitting around their radios, soldiers preparing for war, mothers holding their children, old men remembering the last war, all of them listening, all of them needing something from their king. George stood before the microphone. Lionel Logue stood nearby, calm, steady, present. They had prepared. They had practiced. They had breathed through every difficult word together. But preparation does not stop fear. George looked at the microphone. He thought about every speech that had gone wrong, every silence, every moment of shame, every crowd that had watched him struggle. He breathed. He began. In this grave hour, perhaps the most fateful in our history, the words came. Slowly, carefully, but they came. He spoke about courage. He spoke about unity. He spoke about the long road ahead. Real courage is speaking even when your voice shakes. That broadcast changed everything. The nation heard their king, and they stood up. The war years changed George deeply. He did not hide in his palaces. He did not stay safe behind high walls while his people suffered. He and Queen Elizabeth walked through bombed streets. They visited destroyed neighborhoods. They stood with ordinary families who had lost everything. When Buckingham Palace itself was bombed during the Blitz, Queen Elizabeth said something that became famous. She said she was glad. Now, she said, they could look the people of East London in the eye. George felt the same way, but the war cost him something he could never recover. His health. He had always been physically fragile. The stress of kingship, the weight of war, the years of sleepless nights and endless worry, it all pressed down on his body like a slow and heavy stone. He smoked heavily. It was a different time. People did not understand then what we understand now. But the cigarettes damaged his lungs quietly and permanently. But his body was failing. He had a lung operation in 1951, then another. His voice, the voice he had fought so hard to find, grew weaker. On February 6, 1952, King George VI died quietly in his sleep. He was just 56 years old. The quiet prince who never wanted the crown had worn it with more grace than anyone expected. The world stopped when George VI died. Millions of people mourned, not because they had lost a spectacular king, not because they had lost a warrior or a conqueror. They mourned because they had lost something rarer than that. They had lost a good man. George VI gave Britain something it desperately needed during the darkest years of the 20th century. He gave it steadiness. He gave it dignity. He gave it the quiet, unshakable feeling that someone responsible was standing watch. His daughter, Queen Elizabeth II, watched her father every day. She learned from him what duty looked like, what service looked like, what it meant to put your country before yourself every single day, without complaint. She carried those lessons for 70 years. He supported the policy of appeasement in the late 1930s. This means he, like many British leaders, believed that giving Hitler certain things would prevent a larger war. He supported Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain's attempts to negotiate with Nazi Germany. History showed that this was deeply wrong. Appeasement did not stop Hitler. It only gave him more time. Some historians say George had no real political power, that kings do not make policy. Maybe this is true. The British monarch does not govern directly. But George expressed his support openly, and that support mattered. He also struggled as a father. He was loving, but distant. He had grown up with a cold, demanding father, and without meaning to, he repeated some of those same patterns with his own children. His daughter, Princess Margaret, suffered greatly under royal expectations. Some of that suffering connects back to the family patterns George never fully broke. The first lesson is this: the role you are given is not always the role you wanted. George never asked to be king. He never prepared for it. He never dreamed of it. But when it came, he accepted it. He did the work. He showed up every single day. Sometimes life chooses us before we feel ready. The second lesson is about weakness. George's greatest weakness, his stammer, became his greatest connection to his people. Because he struggled, they trusted him. Because he was imperfect, he was real. Your weakness is not the end of your story. Sometimes it is the very heart of it. The third lesson is about asking for help. George could not fix his stammer alone. He needed Lionel Logue. He needed Queen Elizabeth. He needed people around him who believed in him even when he did not believe in himself. Asking for help is not weakness. It is wisdom. And the fourth lesson is the simplest. Courage is not the absence of fear. George was afraid every single time he stood before a microphone. Every single time. But he spoke anyway. That is all courage ever is. Doing the necessary thing even when you are afraid. My friends, think about what George VI did. He had a voice that did not work the way he wanted. He had words that stopped and caught and refused to come out cleanly. He stood in front of people and felt the silence and the shame and the doubt, and he kept going anyway. You are doing something very similar right now. You are learning English. Some days the words come easily. Some days they stop. Some days you open your mouth and the right word is simply not there. Some days you feel like you will never be fluent. Never be confident, never be good enough. George felt exactly the same way, but he found his voice. Slowly, imperfectly, one word at a time. And so will you. Every story you listen to, you are building something. Every word you understand, you are growing. Every minute you spend here, you are becoming stronger. You already have more courage than you know. He found his voice. Slowly, imperfectly, one word at a time. And so will you. Every story you listen to, you are building something. Every word you understand, you are growing. Every minute you spend here, you are becoming stronger. You already have more courage than you know.